Hey, good morning, and welcome back to the Collective Church NWA online experience. And I'm excited to be back with you guys. So, we have had some time where we went through some Easter stuff, and then we had our gathering last Sunday. And so, we are going to finish James chapter 1 today in verses 26 and 27. But before we get there, I really want to ask you guys a question that I'd love to know if you guys wouldn't, if you guys are cool to kind of put your answers in the text in the chat, which is this. It is, what are some words or phrases that it just kind of rubs you wrong when you hear it? Now, here's what I mean by that. There are some things that have kind of stereotypically over the last 20 years that have been common things that everyone has said. So we're not going that route. We're not going with things that we've all heard a million times. What I want to know is personally to you, kind of like me. So my wife says two things, or she used to say two things, and now she doesn't say them anymore that often, but every once in a while it'll sneak back in, or one of my kids will say it just to hack me off. But those phrases that I just have a hard time with are holla and cray cray. Now, holla being if something great happens, it'd be oh, I got my, income tax return and got money. Holla, nope, don't ever use it. If it's, if something's just crazy and not sure what's going on, be man, that's cray cray. Okay, those are phrases that literally make me want to just punch trees. I can't deal with them. And I know that we all have things that we say that probably frustrate other people, and we all have things that are frustrating to hear other people say. But those for me are, man, when holla and cray cray come up, it's rough. And you can see my family when they want to use it, just we just want to mess with dad, and boom. Now for me, a phrase that I use all the time that I don't think is annoying, but it could be annoying to some, is let's go. And I mean that for everything. Hey, income tax check return. Let's go. Chicago Cubs win the World Series. Let's go. Transformers 7 comes out. Let's go. It doesn't matter. I am someone that loves to use that phrase, but it could be annoying for some. So in the chat right now, I would love to know, what are the phrases, again, not stereotypical ones we've heard our entire lives about people all over the world, but what are to you some phrases or things that when you hear, you're just I can't do it. Please never say that again. Okay, and the reason, as you guys are doing that in the chat right now, I want to say that because we're going to be looking at some verses today that has the word religion and religious in it. And for many of us, quite honestly, those words are rough. We don't even want to be seen as a religious person. We don't want to be seen as someone that's part of a religion. And it's because there have been horrific things done in the name of religion. There have been evil things done by religious people. There have been things done that benefit individuals over the purpose and the call and the vision of God in the name of religion or being religious. So it makes a ton of sense. Man, I just want to validate that those those words, religion and religious, it makes sense if you just have a little bit of a triggery jump backness to it. And if you don't, you just may not have had some of the same interactions that the rest of us have had. But in these verses, I want to read, I think that they've always felt like an add-on. James was just man, I'm not done writing. Hey, here's some things. It's always felt like that. To me, it always felt super just weird that it was added on, because right before, he's talking about in verses 22 through 25, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that you are not only to hear the word, you are to then do it. Evaluate what you hear, and then how do you move forward in your life in obedience based off what you've heard? What do you do based off what you have heard? And when I think about it in that context, and for many of you, maybe, dude, that's always the context I've thought of. Well, I may just take some time. But it's almost as if verses 26 and 27 go, James has seen some things in the churches as he's writing these words, as he's writing this epistle, this letter to Christians, to people that are following God all over in the churches that have scattered out, beginning to hear some things that he knows are not great, that he knows are not the way that he wants the church to be representing, not going in the way that he wants God to do. He goes, hey, here's some things to make sure that you guys have on tap. Here's some things that you guys make sure that we have going. And has just said, and you can't just hear this stuff. You have to do this stuff. You cannot just let this be something that is being said. You have to be a true disciple. You have to then attempt to live it out. So here's verses, James 1:26 through 27. It says, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, that person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So it's trying to help them see, look, do you want to be a person that's religious? Do you want to be someone that is connected to religion? Then you've got to make sure that these things are looked at. You got to make sure that these things are evaluated. And, first off, you look at that and go, okay, so what is religion and what is religious? Well, I tried to stay away from Merriam and Merriam-Webster and all those online dictionaries and stuff like that on purpose, because I wanted to just kind of look at what the words mean, not just the definition. And I know that those things can be synonymous, but I heard someone, as I was listening to a lot of resources on this thing, they talked about that religion is an outward display of something that is inwardly true. They were just trying to give a practical definition of an outward display of something that is inwardly true. So if that is religion, you're trying to give an outward display of what it means to follow Jesus, to follow God, because that is something that is happening invisibly, inwardly inside of you, this connection to God. And therefore, because of that connection that you're working out and you're walking forward in obedience with, then you outwardly get to work that out. Well, I don't have an issue with that definition. When you look at the definition of the words that are used here, you've got the words religious. In the Greek, it means fearing or worshiping God. Fearing, like being in awe of who God is, and like to be able to be in awe to the point that you want to get it right and you want to worship Him. That root word is to make a noise by outcry, or to cry out loud. And so it's like there is making known that you want to worship God and to follow Him, and you are in awe of who He is. The religion, the word religion is the idea of just religious worship. And it can be externally, but and it may even consist of ceremonies. But the idea is that there is a religious discipline to this. That religion is just the discipline of worshiping God, the discipline of fearing Him, being in awe of who He is and what He has done. So when you think about that, the words tend to, maybe we can make margin and space so those words aren't as horrific as sometimes we want to make them. They still may trigger something in front of us, trigger something inside of us. But for the sake of these verses, we're looking at something where he is trying to make a point with the words religion and religious, and that is this: if anyone thinks he is religious, if anyone thinks that he is able to follow God and to be in awe of who He is, and does not bridle his tongue. Now, that idea to bridle is to keep in check or to restrain, like to be able to help pull back on. When I hear this verse and hear it talking about how if anyone thinks he's religious and does not do that they deceive their heart and that person's religion is worthless, I get really nervous. And that's because it's useless when it does not translate into the way you live and the way you treat others. It's useless when the things that you hear and the things that are going on inside of your life, when it's connected to God, when that does not translate into the way you live and in the way you treat others, it's literally saying that it is worthless. It is without worth. It is without use. It is useless. I mean, I'm a person that when it comes to things like bridling your tongue, it's not something that I'm just known for. Okay, it's not like people are just like, man, Chuck really keeps his tongue in check. That is not at all what tends to happen in my life. Now, 46-year-old Chuck, way better at it than 16 and 19-year-old Chuck or 24-year-old Chuck, or pretty much pre-Amy Chuck. I said whatever I wanted. 16-year-old Chuck was a jerk. 19-year-old Chuck thought it was hilarious, but just hurt people with his words. Um, I just was not known for holding in check or restraining. Like my words, I brought pain forward with my words. I brought shame forward with my words. And if anyone thinks he is religious, you have to be able to bridle your tongue, to hold in check or to restrain, or you're deceiving yourself. You're deceiving really the heart of who you really are. And this one is the one that just really gets me, is when it says, again, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Now remember, he's writing to people, but he's writing to a community of people. He's writing to churches because he's realizing that there are things happening that are not what the church was set up to do. And so it's obvious things were being said where people were bringing shame and hurt with their words, and they were bringing pain with that. And when I think about my own life, like I still do that today. I mean, there are so many times I don't bridle my tongue with my kids. Yesterday, I used my words to bring pain on my kids. One of my kids, like I on purpose brought pain because I was so upset about something. I was like, you're going to hurt like I hurt, and I brought pain. Now that's immaturity. That's not good parenting. That's not a bridled tongue. And in that, my religion was worthless. And that makes me nervous. And that makes me fearful because I have that inside of me most of the time. But as I look at it and go, okay, so how do I evaluate that? Well, then I have to ask myself and then ask us as a church, how am I doing at that? Am I able to evaluate how I am doing at bridling my tongue? The way that I say, the way that I type, the way that I text, the way that I write, the way that I post, the way that I tweet, the way that I do the things that make up life today in 2021. Do I have a bridled tongue where I am able to be held in check and restrained? Am I deceiving who I really am? There are some people out there, and I'm one of them sometimes, but there's some people out there that quite honestly, they think they are incredibly holy, but the things that come out of their mouth and the things that come out of what is inside is so unchecked and unrestrained. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't speak truth. I believe that there are times that we have to speak truth even when it's hard, but I believe that we can speak truth in such a way that we are not trying to just pour pain on people and to pour shame on people and to hurt people with what we say. And by making someone else look bad, or by making us look better than someone else. I do that all the time. And the reason I do is because it feels good. It feels good to say nice things about myself and to tear someone else down. Now that says a lot about the state of where I am at times, but it really does at times feels good. It doesn't stay that way. So of all the things that he could talk about, you know, what is religion look like, or what is a religious person, like things that we're supposed to set up, we are to be a person of we're supposed to be a person of a bridled tongue. And then it goes on to say this in verse 27, it says, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. I mean, religion that is pure and undefiled, religion that is spotless and without blemish before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. I think the hardest part of this is that it says in their affliction. I'm like, not only do I have to visit people like orphans and widows, but we are to visit them at their lowest, or where they at a place, because when this was written is like there were people that were being neglected and oppressed because of where they were economically and where they were in society and where circumstances have set them, like widows and orphans. And James brings them out as an example of people that we are to visit, to look after, to put eyes on, that we are to examine, that we are to look upon in order to help or benefit the widows and orphans. And I really believe that we cannot just take away the specificity of this, that we are as individuals and as a church to look at widows and orphans. I don't know exactly what that looks like for the Collective Church NWA, but I want you to know that I'm beginning to examine and evaluate and think about what that is and how we're supposed to do that. But at the same time, I think that we're also supposed to look at it, what it represents. Like in our culture now, who are the ones that are neglected and oppressed? Who are the ones that live at risk? Who are the ones that live in danger of not being able to sustain life because of where they are in the circumstances that are happening? Who are the ones that are on the edge of society? Who are we supposed to look after? So I believe individually And I believe as a church, we need to look at this, that if we want to have a religion, if we want to be able to have this ability to worship God and to be in awe of him and to celebrate him and to connect with him, and we want to do that in a way that makes God happy, then we are to visit, to look after. We got to be hands-on and at times messy with orphans and widows, and not only with widows and orphans, but in their affliction. So we are to watch our tongue. We are to be able to visit those that are in risk. We are to look at orphans and widows and those that are represent that same status in society. And then it says this, and then it says, and then to keep oneself unstained from the world. Man, I got to be honest with you. Like, that's hard. Like, when you hear that, you're like, okay, I tried to find a way for it not to mean spotless or unblemished. But it does mean to be unstained. And when it says, and to keep, the idea there is to attend to carefully. So we're to look at how do we attend to carefully the ability to be spotless. Well, we can't retreat away from the world. We live here every day. Like that idea of the world is everything outside of who we are, the peoples, the places, the stuff, everything outside of who we are. We are to not retreat away from it because we are to exist inside of it. But that doesn't mean it has to be controlling to us. That does mean that we are to have a whole devotion to God and not to let parts of ourselves be stained. One thing that I saw is that to be unstained, or this verse was saying, do not be at odds with the way of Jesus Christ. So, to keep oneself unstained from the world is basically to attending carefully to make sure that you do not live your life at the odds that are at odds with the ways of Jesus Christ. You are to pursue whole devotion. You are to pursue being spotless from the world. And not to retreat away from it. You can't just go live in a cave and be like, okay, that's going to solve it. We've got to make sure that we do this in such a way that we are able to be existing in a world and existing in this world and everything that is outside of who we are. But we are to attend carefully to make sure that we are not stained, that we are to be unstained from the world. So, how are we supposed to do this as a church? I mean, how are we supposed to kind of wrap up what this is? Because to be really honest with you, the question now is, what now? I mean, we're finishing up chapter 1, and we just read, don't just be a hearer, be a doer. And then we read the word that says, look, if you want to do this the way that God wants you to do it, here's some things. Have a bridled tongue. Look after orphans and widows, those that are in need, those that are in danger of being neglected and oppressed. Those are at the edge of society. That's who it was then, and then we can see representation of how that works into our life now. And then attend carefully to staying unstained from the world, to make sure that your life is not in odds with the ways of Jesus Christ. That begins to kind of help me kind of frame and to reference the end of the end of chapter 1, because it's always been kind of this weird thing of, it just feels so chaotic of what he's talking about here. Like, why are you talking about the tongue and then talking about orphans and widows, orphans and widows, and then now we're talking about being unstained. Verses 20 through 25 is just said, don't be a hearer only, be a doer. And then it follows up with this, talking to people, individuals, and those that were a part of these communities of churches that were living their life in such a way that was not matching the intention of the church, was not matching what was supposed to be happening. And don't just be a hearer of what James is writing. Don't just be a hearer of what you were hearing in the early church. Now be a doer, and that is this. If anyone thinks he is religious, if anyone thinks that they are someone who is worshiping God and in awe of God and working to connect to God, in ceremonies and non-ceremonies and in everything that you are doing, that there is a discipline to worshiping God and staying in awe of him and the connection that goes with that. If anyone thinks that is you, you got to make sure that you bridle your tongue. Because if you're not bridling your tongue and you think you're religious, you're literally deceiving your heart, and your religion is worthless, without use, without worth. That is a fearful idea, that I could potentially live a life in such a way that I think I'm doing one thing and that it's not providing any worth because I'm not doing what I hear. So we've got to bridle our tongue. We've got to realize what we say, what we type, all that stuff that we do, we have to keep it restrained and in check. Doesn't mean that we don't speak truth. It means that we've got to always be able to evaluate, is there pain and shame and hurt that is going with this? And if it is because of truth, truth can be hurtful, but are we maliciously putting something on it that doesn't need to be there? Verses 27, religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. Are we willing to evaluate how we do with visiting, to looking after, to getting into the weeds, to getting messy with orphans and widows? And then representing who we are today, those that may be in danger of that same type of neglect and oppression. Are we willing to get into the affliction, or be into a situation where we understand and we look after them in their affliction, and then to keep oneself unstained from the world, that we will carefully attend, making sure that we do not live in a way that is at odds with the ways of Jesus Christ. This is who we are supposed to be as the church. James is saying, you need to look at this. Don't just hear it, but you've got to do it. In this both of these verses, it reads like this is a time for you to evaluate. Do you want to be religious? Do you want to have a pure and undefiled religion? If so, make sure that these are things that are going on. Make sure you're working toward those things. And then as we finish up, the idea of religion and religious doesn't mean that I all of a sudden expect all of us to start using those words. But if we can for a second just step back and not think about what meaning has been put on those words or what people have done to the meanings of those words in the name of them, but look at what this scripture is trying to give us a point, and then that's where we move from. And that's what we hear, and that's what we attempt to do as we move in obedience to God. So I'd love to know your thoughts today in the chat as we look at this as individuals and as we look at it, who we are as the church and as the collective church NWA. I love the fact that there's going to be discussion happening in homes, and I love the fact that we're going to see evidence of that discussion that happens in the chat. You always make us better. It's always one of my favorite times of Sunday is to looking at what you guys add and how you guys make us better with what God is doing in you and through you. Hey, listen, I'm excited about what is coming forward with the collective and who we are as a church and what we get to do in groups and what we get to do when we come together for our gatherings and what we get to do in situations like this when we get to have our online experience. So have an incredible day talking through James 1, 26 through 27. I'm looking forward to James 2 that we get to start next week. You guys have an incredible day and an incredible time. Thank you so much.